good for me to know. Okay, so yeah, so this lecture is all about Michel Foucault's theory of social control, and we're studying his work through the lens of sociology, particularly the sociology of deviance. So let's get cracking. Yeah, before we sort of engage with today's topic, just as, I guess a bit of a trigger warning, if you like. There will be towards the end some discussions about obesity and anorexia within this lecture. Please note that if you find these topics distressing, don't feel you have to or you must listen to them. You know, you're welcome to drop in and out as you like. It's nothing too concerning or nothing too disturbing. No imagery involved, but yeah, just to sort of give you that heads up. Also, if anyone is sort of experiencing any abnormal behavior, or you're worried about your own sort of health and mental health, physical health, there's the email address on this for the Student Wellbeing Service at bafspa.ac.uk, and their telephone number as well, and they, you know, are there to sort of offer advice and point you in the right direction for matters concerning eating irregularities or mental health issues or anything along those lines. So they're a friendly bunch. They're there for your to support you. University and undergrad is known to be stressful. So yeah, keep an eye on your own health and each other's health as part of your learning. You know, you sort of left school now as well. You're in university, so it's about sort of taking responsibility for your own well-being as part of your progression in life. So some are able to adapt to that better than others. So bear that in mind as well. So all the details are there, and don't feel ashamed or embarrassed to ask for help. Everyone needs a hand in life. That's the nature of existence and people, I guess. So anyway, today's lecture aims, we're going to have a look at Michel Foucault's work, particularly knowledge, power, not so much ethics actually, more we could say knowledge, power and culture are the main things we're going to look at. And we're going to explore the notion of disciplinary power and biopower, which are sort of two aspects of his theory. Okay, in the context of this course, we're interested in rules, norms, laws, and social control. And then also, you know, we're interested in deviancy, so crime as a form of deviancy for the criminologists in the group. And we can also think of other forms of deviancy if, you know, we're interested in people who stand out in the fashion industry, perhaps quite deviant, or in the art world, deviancy could be understood in a different way. Okay, so this is Michel Foucault. I've heard his surname pronounced Foucault, Foucault, Foucault. Other people pronounce the surname. He's a French philosopher, very influential to the social sciences. Lived between 1926 and 1984. So he was alive in my lifetime, if you like. What we'll look at today is his emphasis on power. So this week there's a big emphasis in sociology and deviancy of control on power, and Michel Foucault's main theory looked at the relationship between power and knowledge, and the way it sort of shaped and formed and influenced human culture. And we all live in human culture, so in those terms, we're all affected by power and the way it shapes and molds and creates knowledge. And this is rather than capitalism, society, or social class, which are familiar themes in modern sociology. So Karl Marx, Durkheim, Weber. This is a new take on things, if you like. Or Michel Foucault is developing the theory of power in a different direction to Weber, Marx, and Durkheim. So he had a range of books written on different topics. So one was on the history of madness, another book on the birth of the clinic, a book on the sort of general order of things. So you could say, you know, the way sort of society is structured. A book on discipline and punishment. That one's called The Birth of the Prison. And then also a book on the history of sexuality, which is split into volume 1 and volume 2, which was published in 1976. So that's the year I was born. So, like I say, he's a fairly recent sort of theorist. And his key theory, really, which we'll look at today, which is, I spend a lot of time teaching on this, is called the panopticon or panopticism. And surveillance, and it's taught widely within the social sciences. Some of you may have learnt it sort of A level. Yeah, and it's sort of widely embraced. There's a fairly coherent theory about social control and possibly deviancy as well. Okay, so that's some sort of a fetching photograph of Foucault. I'll give you this little gem of knowledge as well. Some people think this is relevant for discussing Foucault, but he was sort of known for being a bit sort of sexually promiscuous. He was a homosexual, and you might describe him as slightly kinky as well. And the reason I find that sort of interesting, worthwhile mentioning, perhaps is because he sort of deals with themes of sex, power, and domination, which, yeah, I'll leave your imagination to do the rest of the sort of filling in there. But it sticks out in my mind when I think of Michel Foucault and I read his work. You know, there's sort of like this sort of underlying dynamics of power that, yeah, and yeah, I guess. Well, anyway, I'll leave you to fill in the blanks there, but just it's mentioned, and I think it's sometimes worth sort of mentioning. So Michel Foucault was interested in modernity and modernizing society, like a lot of sociologists were, and the transition from sort of feudal system societies into globalized modern society. And like many sociologists, Karl Marx and Durkheim and Weber, he was writing and making notes about this transition from pre-modern to modern and perhaps postmodern society as well. And he was interested in this sort of like this changing dynamics of power, you could put it like that. So in old feudal societies or in pre-modern societies or non-modern cultures, you might say there's the dynamics are based around what Foucault labeled sovereign power. So power in this dynamic was top down. Punishments tended in the past to be harsh, brutal, or what we consider today to be inhumane. And an example of that is the Roman Patria Potestas, which is Latin for power of the father. So I'll just read a quote from Foucault here. So he says, a long time ago, one of the characteristic privileges of sovereign power was the right to decide life and death. In a formal sense, it derived no doubt from the ancient Patria Potestas that granted the father of the Roman family the right to dispose of the life of his children and his slaves, just as he had given life to them, so he could take it away. So if you, yeah, this theory of sovereign power and biopower, you can read in this book, The History of Sexuality, and then in the final chapter on page 135, this quote was taken. But yeah, it's giving you an idea of, you know, how power used to be. So perhaps, you know, top down, you know, in a society with a king, and then a patriarch at the head of the family, unable to sort of like administer power over life or death. and that was all considered sort of legal and fine, and you know, the best way of doing things at that time. Yeah, so you know, power in that sense was quite awesome, quite scary, quite brutal. But over time, punishment, for example, beheading someone, moved to being carried out behind closed doors, locked away, sort of vaults and chambers, to yeah, sort of prisons as we know them today, if you like. And punishment became a lot more bureaucratic through that process. So if you were arrested for sort of murder today, you know, you'd be sort of like taken off, and then go through a whole bureaucratic process of, you know, what's your name, date of birth, photographs, fingerprints, and then the court case in front of the judge and jury. And you know, it could take up to a year to sort of process someone in that sense, before having them taken away and to a prison where they're subject to even more sort of bureaucratic processes, and we'll get to that later. So over time, brutal regimes were slowly replaced with more civilized and private approaches that worked on the minds and souls of perpetrators rather than the bodies of perpetrators. In the old days, you know, sort of torturing people, yeah, the body was the sort of the main site of punishment. But you know, over time that ceased to be the case, and it's more so the case that treating people's minds and perhaps souls, you know, is a way of tackling crime. Previous harsher forms of control and punishment were ineffective in maintaining social order because discipline was only used intermittently. And as we'll get to later, in modern society, social control tends to be much more of a lifetime project. So, Discipline and Punish was a book that Foucault published in 1975. The subtitle is The Birth of the Prison. So yeah, Foucault was really writing about this transition in this book, from a state of sovereign power. So, for example, theorizing public execution, the last of which happened in 1957, I think, in Paris. Well, I'd have to check that. As I remember, I think that's Paris, the last beheading took place, if you like. To a situation now of prisons and timetables. So this is from 1833, and you can see on this prison timetable there's a sort of schedule from Monday to Friday, with a regime of people waking up, perhaps having a walk around the yard, lunchtime, work time, and the day very much structured, you know, with different events throughout the day. And for Foucault, he noticed this sort of similarity in different types of institution that were developing around Europe about the same time. So clinics, madhouses, universities, hospitals, army barracks, all had sort of timetables and scheduled events, and people were sort of disciplined into routine, and that really does affect the way people sort of act and behave, doesn't it? Just not just at an individual level, but as a social level. You might bump into your mate sort of rushing down the corridor, and say, you know, what you're up to, and they might say, oh, I'm late for a seminar or a lecture, and that sort of that behaviour and that routine is sort of disciplined into people's lives. So we all sort of follow some standard and conformity. So yeah, he's identified sort of two types of power. The former modes of sovereign power, that is very much focused on the human body and affects the body very negatively. And power there had the right to take life or let it live. And then this new mode of biopower that has a sort of positive function. And there's a quote here from Foucault: political power had assigned itself the task of administering life. So no longer was power focused on administering death. It was much more focused on shaping the lives and livelihoods of people who were in a state of living, I guess you could say. So that's a sort of a transition that in power that Foucault has theorized. So yeah, a public execution in 1757. So just a quote here from Foucault: "The criminal was taken and conveyed in a cart, wearing nothing but a shirt, to the Place de Grève. Palace de Grève. My French is terrible. Excuse it. Sorry. Where on a scaffold that will be erected there, the flesh will be torn from his breasts, arms, thighs, and calves with red-hot pincers, his right hand burnt with sulphur, and on those places where the flesh be torn away, poured molten lead, boiling oil. Then his body hung, drawn, and quartered by 4 horses, and his limbs and body consumed by fire, reduced to ashes, and ashes thrown into the winds." So that's sort of form of punishment and discipline, a way of sort of controlling people through fear, and this form of public execution, being hung, drawn, and quartered. Quite gruesome, quite grisly, and like I say, inhumane by today's standard. And compare this to a prison timetable in 1833. At the first drum roll, the prisoners must arise and dress in silence. As the supervisor opens the cell doors, they must line up and proceed to the chapel for morning prayers. Afterward, they form into work teams and go off to work, which must begin at 6 in the summer and 7 in the winter. At 7:30 in the summer and 8:30 in the winter, the prisoners must be back in their cells after the washing of hands and the inspection of clothes in the courtyard. So that's from the same book, pages 6 and 7. And yeah, we see a noticeable difference in the way power disciplines people. In the first quotation, it's very much centered on the body of an individual human being, and sort of spreading fear through a community. And in the second quote, it's very much focused on a collective of prisoners, and on the way their lives play out, sort of controlling their presence in time and space. So yeah, this second form of power is called disciplinary power. So it's the power to discipline people. And there's 2 meanings of discipline. So individuals are disciplined by power, and then power is wielded by the disciplines. For example, medicine, psychiatry, social work, and that brings into being various experts. So my academic discipline is sociology, and I'm this supposed expert on this this subject and this body of knowledge that is called sociology. Okay, and this is a different discipline, is a different form of social control to Marx's theory of social control, where ideology controls people and secures consent. So as we saw in sort of last week's seminars and lecture, Karl Marx had a theory or developed a theory that would attempt to understand why workers would continue to work for exploiters, given the fact that the capitalists in society would pay workers a disproportionate and unfair income. And one of, his main idea was that of ideology and false consciousness. So painting a picture and glamorizing life in a way that secures continual consent from workers in a society based upon class conflict and exploitation. So that sort of conflict is below the surface of society. but we're dangled different carrots or made to think about our lives in different ways that conceals that ongoing exploitation. Maybe at Christmas time, the sort of we're encouraged to think about sort of the magic and the wonder of Christmas, and it conceals the sort of acts of drunkenness and the stressed out working environments many of us find ourselves in, attempting to afford presents for the family. But this is different. Disciplinary power doesn't just coerce; it corrects. It corrects by establishing and policing rules and norms, punishing and disciplining people so they act and behave in different ways, not just by feeding them lies or ideas about society, or sort of duping them into false consciousness. This is, sort of like a very active power. Okay, so actually, I won't show you. I'll come back to this. Yeah, no, actually, okay. I should have a sort of a pointer here. So this lecture now, we're going to go into Foucault's theory of surveillance, which will give you an idea of how power works, not just in the lives of prisoners, but in the lives of people, you and I, and everyday members of society. But this is very much based on a theory of prisons. So what Foucault did was he analysed the design of a prison called the Panopticon. And this was a prison that was designed by a philosopher called Jeremy Bentham. He was a bit of an oddball. So Jeremy Bentham was an Enlightenment philosopher. He was born in England in 1748 and lived until 1832. He's credited for his contribution to utilitarianism, which is the philosophy that suggests that things are good if they have a greater use for society, if you like. So things are useful and have a sort of a useful social purpose. And Jeremy Bentham designed the Panoptic prison, which Foucault analysed later on down the line. And if you're interested in Jeremy Bentham and the reason why I think he's a bit of an oddball, then you can go to the UCL library in London, where you'll see his body on display in this, in what he called the auto icon. And that was his body is displayed in public on his request. And I'm not sure to this day, I'm not sure why he wanted to just put his body on display. Yeah, it is fascinating. For me, I think the reason Bentham, well, the fact that Bentham put his body on display in general public should give you some idea about perhaps his ideas of privacy and public life. And perhaps he didn't have the same sort of concerns about privacy that many people do. And the fact that he designed the Panoptic prison, as we'll see, sort of goes into issues of privacy and not wanting to be seen in the general public, if you like. So this is his prison design. It was called the Panopticon, and it was an inspection house. So the prison wardens that would live and work in this sort of central tower in the middle of the prison. And around them is a collection of prison cells in a circumference, in a circular shape. And all of these prison cells are stacked up with prisoners. And the key thing here is that the prison wardens would be able to view into the prisoners' cells 360 degrees around them in a sort of like panorama. Whereas the prisoners themselves couldn't see into the prison tower. That would be either darkened, or you can see this prison tower in the middle has got these bright lights. So the prison wardens are fully aware of what the prisoners are doing, but the prisoners haven't got a clue if what the wardens are doing, whether they're watching them or not. but they could be reading newspapers, they could be playing with their mobile phones, they could be filming them. The prisoners have no idea what the wardens are doing, but the wardens pretty much know all about the prisoners. So yeah, the guards can always see into the cells, and the prisoners cannot see into the inspection tower, and that means that they're subject to constant surveillance. And that constant surveillance instills a sense of vulnerability, and subsequently brings about a sense of self-control within the prisoner. And that was the sort of aim of the panopticon for Jeremy Bentham, was to get prisoners to regulate and control their own behaviour. And this is how Foucault analysed Bentham's panopticon, and this is what Foucault wrote about it. So the panopticon is a machine for dissociating the see being seen dyad in the I'm not going to pronounce it. Perpetric ring. One is totally seen without ever seeing. The central tower, one sees everything without ever being seen. So that's the sort of difference in the power dynamics between the wardens and the prisoners. And there's quite a nice illustration of an all-seeing eye there in the middle of the prison with these prisoners in their cells. There's some similarity for those who are fans of George Orwell and his book Big Brother, or the movie Big Brother, 1984, sort of notable expressions of doubt, fears, and anxieties regarding new technologies such as cameras and filming devices, and new means of government surveillance. So a bit of worry and concern and anxiety about technologies being used to monitor and control people en masse. So yeah, just to point that similarity out between Foucault and Orwell. Neither of them cited each other. That I don't think Orwell wouldn't have read Foucault, and I'm not sure if Foucault ever mentioned Orwell, but a lot of people talk about the similarities between the two people's ideas. So that's worth pointing out. So yeah, if you're one of these prisoners in a panoptic prison, the prisoners were caught up in the exercise of power over themselves. In fact, it should not be necessary to exercise power over them at all, because they are exercising self-discipline. So this feeling that you could be watched at any time, the prison guards could be there watching you, might cause you to act and behave in proper ways. Maybe if you were sort of doing something you shouldn't be doing, you'd certainly try your best to hide it from them. But your unawareness of whether they were ever actually watching or not watching would extend throughout the lived day, if you like. So you'd be constantly aware that someone could be watching you and act according to their rules and the sort of the morality of the prison and what they deem as good and bad behaviour, or punishable and non-punishable behaviour. So yeah, this is called sort of self-surveillance. So norms are not just imposed from the outside. Eventually we internalize the norm, the moral norm. So what is deemed good and bad, or right or wrong, or punishable and not punishable. And we as sort of individuals go through this process of self-surveillance. So this is, within prisons, but for Foucault, this is also within universities, within hospitals, within police stations, perhaps, you might even say within shops where there's CCTV cameras watching, perhaps when we're driving our car through speed cameras, we're constantly aware that we could be being watched, and this is a new mode of power and governance. And we think about the norms concerning the appearance of our bodies too. So our health, beauty, fitness, etc., which we'll come to later. But there's lots of norms, especially what is deemed right and wrong within society. So yeah, Foucault and surveillance, the massive explosion of surveillance techniques in modern societies include speed cameras, closed circuit television, intelligence services, spies, wiretapping, FBI, CIA, a collection of databases on individuals by state authorities. For example, the Department of Health. In more European countries, you have to carry an identity card in public, and we'll get to it later as well. The sort of social network media as well could be included in this as well. Yeah, very much so. Yeah, Sami. So all of these things can be considered institutions. So a hospital, prison, university, these are institutions, and getting us to internalize moral norms and codes of conduct can be referred to, and I think Foucault does talk about these in terms of institutionalization. So we are institutionalized. As part of your induction to Bath Spa University, they were giving you all the information about how to conduct yourself, and for example, receiving a code from a lecturer at the start of a lecture, and inputting that into your device to demonstrate that you had attended a lecture or not. So that is part of the sort of surveillance technique that is used at Bath Spa. Very welcome. Okay, and other people have taken this idea of panopticon from Bentham to Foucault, and applied it to the rise of information communication technologies, or ICT. So if you take biopower and the panoptic principle, or Bentham's panoptic principle, and apply it to the rise of new information communication technologies, as David Leon has done in 2004, what he did was theorize a super panopticon, and this is a sort of a global state of surveillance, and that's a global state of social surveillance. So we've got these sort of social network medias that cover the globe, for example, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, which are all the Facebook company, aren't they? I've got a photograph here of GCHQ in London, which is the government surveillancing centre in the UK, and they sort of monitor information communication technology and media across the globe, to keep an eye on potential threats such as terrorism, and actually what they do in GCHQ is very much secret, but it's an interesting sort of place, and that's in Wembley, just outside of London. So yeah, you could say we live in a super panoptic age. So Foucault's model of power is relational, and in the History of Sexuality, Volume 1, he theorized that first of all, power is everywhere. So just imagine that, if you wanted to escape from society and get away somewhere quiet, go into the countryside perhaps, and spend the weekend in a hut, lock yourself off from everyone, to spend some time by yourself, according to Foucault's theory, you'd still be sort of caught up, entangled within power somehow. And he argues where there is power, you'll also find resistance. And resistance is also a sort of quest for power, if you like. So for some people, I think I'd include myself in that probably, that this is perhaps a downside of Foucault's theory, is perhaps all-encompassing. The idea that you can never escape society and power is everywhere. Yeah, that is, some people complain about that. So that is a bit too all-encompassing. Sorry, Karen, there's no attendance code today. Thanks, Wei-Ling. So unlike Marx, Foucault is not a utopian thinker. In some respects, you might consider this slightly dystopian. It's a different concept of power to Marx and anarchism, or anarchists who sort of believe that we might be able to topple and tackle the power of capitalism or the power of the government, and live in a sort of society which doesn't revolve around power or discipline and punishment. There's no theory that human nature might eventually be emancipated, as you get if you read the work of Karl Marx. Marx was a bit of an optimist. He believed that communism would set people free, emancipate people, and that's not found in the work of Foucault. Yeah, so bottom line, basically, you can never escape relations of power. Societies are sort of riddled with power, or power is omnipresent, always around us, and we're always subject to it. It's always controlling us and disciplining us. So in response to this, some people bring up issues of counter-surveillance, and you might consider this as a form of deviancy. So like I've said, Foucault's theory of power and social control is criticized as being all-encompassing. However, counter-surveillance is offered sometimes to demonstrate how power works in many different ways. Examples of counter-surveillance, you might consider the Rodney King case in 1991, which was very famous when I was in college, and that sort of escalated when Rodney King was video recorded being beaten up and killed by the police. That sparked the LA riots, which lasted for a good weekend, possibly even a week. And then we've seen it more recently with George Floyd as well, someone taking out their mobile phone and videoing the police murdering a Black American citizen, an African American, in broad daylight. And that sparked off a sort of global demonstration. In Wales Cathedral, the Archbishop of obviously called the Archbishop, I've forgotten his name, but he got down on his knee, and lots of people did around the world, and sort of united against the police powers or the state powers in the US at that time, that had sort of taken the life of I want to say innocent Black man. I guess there was some sort of problem, but it was yeah, just shocking behaviour, wasn't it? And illegal and murder. So I think it's an important case to include, because it demonstrates how, although the police and the state have authority and power, we, the public, can sort of challenge that power through our technologies of surveillance, which perhaps Foucault's panopticon fails to consider the dynamics of power. So yeah, we all have access to surveillance technologies and power. However, Foucault may still have a point. It's still power. We're still sort of involved in the capturing of knowledge, the sharing of information and knowledge, to empower ourselves and our communities. Anyway, so a bit more on biopower before we bring this to a close. Disciplinary power works upon the human body. This is what Foucault means by biopower. So you could understand biopower to mean biological power, and the human body being a sort of a biological thing. So biopower works both individually and collectively. So individually, it works on the body as if it were a machine, disciplining it. So, for example, the strict timetables of prisons or schools is a way of disciplining the human body and making sure it's in different places at different times. And then collectively, biopower works upon the species body or the population, which may be researched and statistics produced about health, longevity, childbirth, death, suicide, sexual functioning. This is also referred to as the body politic. I've got a photograph or an image here of Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan, which was considered to be a sort of a social being, a human body created of lots of, as you can see in this picture here, lots of small people creating one big person. So I guess in that sense, you know, biopower works on the individual and the collective simultaneously. So disciplinary power and the human body. So our government, the British government, uses a measurement called the body mass index, the BMI, to decide on ideal body weight. Put a yes in the comments box if you have ever or ever looked at your BMI, your body mass index. I have. I certainly have when I was using. Yeah, yeah, it's quite a popular thing, isn't it? You can sort of download an app, a sort of exercise app, and there's a photograph of someone doing that, and you can go to the gym and calculate your BMI, and then figure out how many calories you're intaking, and the best sort of exercise to burn fat or change your body in different ways. So, but this sort of BMI index is based on government data about English people. And it does sort of vary from culture to culture and society to society. So my BMI app was actually a sort of Chinese app, and I figured out that BMI calculations were calculated somewhere in Asia. So I don't know, the measurements, etc., were based around sort of Asian measurements, which didn't sort of transfer into European standards. So I was sort of comparing my BMI to the average of a Taiwanese man, for example, which sort of was a little bit ski with. Yeah. And yeah, we've got this as well. We'll be doing this in seminars this week, but the government launched a Change for Life campaign, which was based around eating well, moving more in order to live longer. So there's a sort of like a functionalist aspect to this. And so if we apply these ideas to the issue of obesity, we can see that disciplinary power, the definition of body mass index, establishes the rule about an ideal body weight. Biopower, the diet, is clearly about the human body and how we treat it. And we're sort of disciplined, we're disciplined to treat our body well. And governmentality, so various health and lifestyle interventions, for example, the Change for Life campaign, are designed to help us manage our bodies. And there's a sort of economic aspect to this government. As the government claims obesity levels are a strain on the NHS. So by us taking the individual responsibility for the monitoring and the caring of our own bodies, we save the NHS money, which in turn saves taxpayers money, and probably saves big corporations money as well. Right. Actually, I'm sort of running out of time here a little bit. We can just think about the UK national guideline on either obesity and anorexia, and the screening of eating disorders. And disorder as a form of deviancy. So the government are able to sort of look at the general population of people in the UK, and monitor the statistics to decide that as a nation we need to get healthier, less fish and chips, less booze, less cigarettes, and more sort of active, healthier lifestyle. Target groups for screening should include young women with low body mass index, and this is a way of sort of tackling anorexia, compared with age norms. Patients consulting their weight concerns who are not overweight, women with menstrual disturbances. I'm not going to pronounce that. Anyway, so if we look at the BMI through the lens of Foucault's theory about disciplinary power, we can say that the BMI establishes a norm, and when young women don't observe the norm in terms of being underweight, they may be diagnosed as having anorexia. The treatment is designed to return the BMI to the sort of normal standard. It doesn't just work by force feeding them, but getting them to practice self-surveillance. So keeping an eye on yourself, checking your own self, and perhaps using technologies, surveillance technologies, to look after your own well-being is part of self-surveillance. Most treatment is not inpatient, but a much looser application of power by counselling and self-help techniques. This is, I think, the last slide now. So Foucault, embodiment and gender subjectivities, the case of voluntary self-starvation. So this is a publication from 1997. You can have a look at it online, Eckermann. So this person is taking note of how people are treated who suffer from severe eating disorders, and he analyzes sort of the institution where these eating disorders are treated, and takes note that the rooms chosen for those undergoing behavioral modification where the site of the nurse's station with glass panels to allow for uninterrupted vision. All meal showers and toileting were carefully supervised. So as Foucault would suggest, an eye is kept on the general population to identify deviancy and problems, eating disorders, and then those suffering with those eating disorders are taken into an institution and kept an eye on, and monitored in a way that makes them self-regulate and keep an eye on their own actions and behaviour according to these sort of norms and conventions of society. So this follows the panoptic principles, involves surveillance and monitoring. There's a comparison between the deviant and established norms, the BMI, and a sense of internalized norms, or normalization or institutionalization of norms to the body. And surveillance and power are not bad necessarily, but this is just a sort of modern technique of correcting and controlling people's behavior around issues of food and food consumption. So to conclude, before I conclude, I will give you a sort of heads up. Tomorrow morning's lecture is going to be all about Judith Butler and her theories about gender. And Butler is sort of heavily influenced by Foucault's theories of power. So if you are interested in discussions of gender and thinking about the way gender is formed as what Foucault would call a discursive formation, then yeah, make sure you get online tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. I'll be able to take you through that. Yeah, and to conclude, so Foucault offers us an alternative way about thinking about social control, so different to Marx, different to Weber, different to Durkheim. He considered control in terms of power and knowledge, and particularly sort of human culture. He recognizes the role of authority, prisons, and discipline and punishment in ways that perhaps Marxist theory of ideology leaves out. And it offers us a non-moral way of thinking about established rules and norms that control human behaviour and also deviancy. So that is it. Thank you all very much for attending today's lecture. We've got 5 minutes before the class closes. Still 78 of you online. I'd imagine a couple of you might be baking a cake or making a pot noodle perhaps. But if there are any questions, now is the time to ask them. Feel free to put those in the comment box. If not, yeah, good question, Mina. Yeah, okay, so tomorrow, actually tonight, I'm going to go home and I'm going to upload the slides for the seminars this week. And those slides are going to include the question for the essay number 1. So I'll also put it in the announcements, the module announcements as well. So keep an eye out. That'll be online later tonight. So yeah, thank you very much for asking about that. And sorry for any delay in that being posted, but that will be with you tonight, so you can start work on that. Thanks, Sammy. Cheers, Mealy. Thanks, Jenna. Thanks, Jack. Cheers, John. Have a lovely day, everyone.